as long as we are not safe. Is there any reaction to these words from the shooter?
I have seen the press reports of those comments, and only the press reports of those comments. As I said, the U.S. State Department is not ruling out the possibility that this is an act of terrorism. We would never do that. But I think we also need to let investigators do their work. It is still very much an active crime scene, and we're going to let that process proceed before making any conclusions. And matter of fact, it really isn't for us to make those conclusions. But certainly, without question, we would think that terrorism would need to be one thing investigated, one thing looked into, given the press reporting that we've seen about what his alleged comments were. But again, I don't think it's helpful for anybody to get ahead of this. I also think, if you don't mind me saying, that we all need to recognize that there's a family going through a very tough time today. This man was assassinated in cold blood. And I think we need to keep their sensitivities and their concerns and their grief in mind right now. And it doesn't do anybody any good to try to leap 2, 3, 10 steps ahead of where we are. There is a diplomat who was killed today. There's a family who's in grief, and obviously this is an assault, as the Secretary said, not just on this individual, but on the act of diplomacy itself. I mean, he was speaking at an art gallery. This is what, part of what diplomats do in terms of sharing and dialogue and culture. And I mean, there's an international system here that was also assaulted, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
Now, is the situation at the U.S. Embassy connected with the shooting? Is this like in response to the shooting, or is there a separate incident?
No, I mean, the order to lock down and the security message was done specifically because of the shooting at the art gallery. There is no other incident, no other threat at all. The embassy did exactly what they should have done given their proximity to the scene.
And will this enhance the possibility of cooperation between countries against terrorism?
I think, as we've said many times, the international community does share a common threat against terrorism. And to the degree that the international community, bilaterally or multilaterally, can improve cooperation on counterterrorism efforts, that's to the betterment of everybody, no matter where you live, no matter what country you call home. What will come as a result of this incident, I think we, again, need to wait to see the results of the investigation and see where it leads us. As I said, I don't think anybody can rule out the possibility that this is terrorism, but we can't get ahead of what is really only an hour or two old fresh start investigation.
Now, this city that the shooter reportedly invoked is a big point of disagreement between the United States and Russia, correct?
It's a big point of contention between Syria, Russia, Iran, and the rest of the international community.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Have we increased security or taken any further precautions for our own ambassadors in the area and other countries surrounding that?
Well, as again, I would say we don't talk about the specifics of force protection. We obviously take the protection of our embassy personnel very, very seriously all around the world. And you can imagine that in certain places and at certain times that security is adjusted to react to or to reflect whatever the security environment is there. I won't speculate, I won't talk in any detail about what, if any, changes there might be to our security posture in Ankara. I can just assure you and assure the American people that we take the safety and security of our ambassadors and our embassy personnel very, very seriously. If I could just mention, we also do take seriously the safety and security of Americans that are overseas, whether they're on business or on travel for pleasure. That's why it was so important for our embassy to issue that security message to warn people to stay away because of their proximity to this event. So it's something we always look at, we always amend as needed, and we never ever talk about the details of that. Yeah.
UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura said he plans to convene peace talks in Geneva in February.
Yeah.
Does the U.S. have any comment or statement?
We've seen those comments, and if in fact it can be done in February, we would certainly welcome that. I think you heard the Secretary talk to this last week, that we want to see a return to political talks as soon as possible. So if in fact it can happen in early February, that would be very welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
Iraq, Mosul. both the New York Times and Washington Post over the weekend reported that there are serious difficulties in liberation of Mosul, both in the slow pace of the operation and in the humanitarian situation. Do you think that you, or at least Baghdad, which had the lead, that the difficulties in Mosul were underestimated?
Well, first of all, I would commend the reporting in both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I mean, those are very thoughtful pieces about a very dynamic, very fluid, very challenging environment. And there's no question. I think everybody knew well in advance of the Mosul campaign kicking off that it was going to be difficult, and that there was going to be humanitarian needs on a major scale as a result of the campaign. You know, I remember being asked many months ago about, you know, why hasn't Mosul kicked off yet, and what's the delay, and why aren't you putting more effort into spurring Iraq to mount that campaign sooner? And back then we said, because it's going to be hard, and because there's a lot of planning that needs to go into it, not just pre-planning or even implementation, but thinking about post-liberation. And so there was a lot of that thought, and there was a lot of that planning, and there has been a lot of effort put into the humanitarian aspect of this. And just, if you don't mind, I'll walk through just a little bit of it. Now, as I say this, I also want to say right at the outset that we're mindful there's still work to be done. We're mindful that there are still internally displaced people, and that there are still needs that have to be met. I'm not at all suggesting that the reporting is inaccurate. We know that there are many people being pushed out because of the campaign there, and that they are, some of them, in desperate need. But there was a lot of thought given to this, and there has been a lot of effort applied to it. Since the 17th of October, UN and humanitarian partners have provided more than 130,000 people with USAID-funded relief kits, nearly 163,000. Nearly 164,000 people with household items, and approximately 185,000 people with 30-day food rations. Relief groups have also provided medical care to almost 50,000 people. Since the start of the operation, more than 100,000 have been provided shelter in camps or local communities. There continue to be spaces available, more than 40,000 spaces available for additional internally displaced people who we do anticipate now being in need as a result of the Mosul operations. On December 8th, just a little bit ago, USAID-funded UN partners, the World Food Program, UNICEF, UN Populations Fund, provided food, hygiene kits, water purification tablets, water containers, and other critical relief items to more than 42,000 people in eastern Mosul, making this the single largest humanitarian aid delivery in eastern Mosul since the current conflict began. So, look, that's just a little bit of the metrics to show the degree to which and the specificity to which these kinds of needs were anticipated. Again, not disputing the reporting, not disputing that more needs to be done, and that we're going to continue to work with the government of Iraq and with the UN and other agencies to constantly assess the situation on the ground and adjust as necessary.
Well, would you know then why, if there's space available, the Washington Post says that humanitarian agencies say in Mosul say they don't have enough aid, to meet the need? Is
well,
it
as
that
I said,
people can't get out, or?
As I said, we hold it that there is space available, more than 40,000 spaces available, and if there's a disconnect, we'll see what we can do to close that disconnect, to close that seam. And as I also said, we're in constant communication with the UN and other aid agencies and organizations, and we'll continue to do that. But I want to underscore here that while we have thought this through, and while we have done these things, we recognize there's still a challenge out there. We're not at all rejecting that premise, and we're not at all saying that there aren't people in need. Maybe it's just that they don't know where to go. So maybe it's really just an issue of trying to help them get to where they need to be. But we're all mindful of this. And as to your question on the pace of it, as we also always said that this was going to be a long, tough fight, it's proving to be a long, tough fight. And it's only going to go as fast, and it's only going to go as far as the Iraqi security forces are able to do it on their schedule, on their plan. This is their campaign. We're going to continue to support it.
If I could ask two related questions. Secretary Kerry was in Riyadh over the weekend. Maybe even you were with him.
No,
Anyhow,
he's not back yet, so I know I wasn't there.
you weren't with him. Okay, but did he discuss the fight against ISIS while he was in Riyadh, or are the Saudis still part of the anti-ISIS coalition?
They are a major contributor in terms of humanitarian needs and other such contributions. Certainly, they're a part of the coalition, absolutely. And yes, they did talk about the counter-Daesh fight. But the primary focus, as I think you saw from the Secretary's comments himself, was really about Yemen and trying to get to a better outcome there.
Can you inform us what they discussed about the counter-Daesh fight?
I think I'd leave it to the traveling team to read out those discussions, and you saw the Secretary's press conference himself. Obviously, they talked about the need to continue to keep the pressure on Daesh. They talked about the progress that we've made against the organization, and yet they also, I think, squarely acknowledged that there's more to be done. Sure.
Well, can I just one more on Baghdadi? You announced $25 million for Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And what explains the timing? Is it related to concerns about ISIS terrorism that have prompted the Raqqa operation to be accelerated or something like that?
I'm not aware that there was a particular trigger here. I think Brett McGurk and our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security talked about this on Friday. But look, I mean, we have to continue to look for ways to put pressure on Daesh. And this is a group that is under stress, no question about it. But this particular decision on Baghdadi is very much in keeping with our broader efforts to continue to try to degrade and destroy this group. And I wouldn't link the timing of the announcement to any one thing. We certainly know he's still out there. We certainly know that he's in a leadership role, and that makes him a legitimate national security threat.
So it's just kind of out of the blue. For your
I wouldn't say it was out of the blue. I mean, we don't just.
What causes it?
I think I answered the question. Brad.
Over the weekend, there were Iranian calls for a P5+1 plus Iran meeting. They're still quite peeved about the Iran Sanctions Act extension. Is that something the United States would be amenable to?
Well, as you know, the Joint Commission was set up to talk about compliance issues and to provide a forum to do that. So certainly it's within Iran's purview to ask for a Joint Commission meeting to talk about this as they see it in terms of compliance. What I would just simply repeat is that the Iran Sanctions Act was in place at the time the JCPOA was negotiated and has remained in place. Its extension is not a violation of the JCPOA and does not reintroduce or reimpose any nuclear-related secondary sanctions that were waived on implementation day, nor does it impose any new nuclear-related sanctions. So while we didn't believe the act needed to be extended, its extension as written in law does not violate it. We stand by that, as well as the Secretary's intention to continue to waive as necessary those specific sanctions. Yeah. So, but again, look, I mean, if they call for that, certainly that's their purview to do it, and we would participate.
So that was so do you expect this meeting, what level would this meeting be at? Just
I don't know.
Technical level?
I don't know. It's hypothetical at this point.
Okay, and then one other Iran questions. There were some pictures, plenty of them actually, of IRGC Commander Qasem Soleimani in Aleppo. I know this isn't the first time he's traveled abroad, despite his ban on international travel. Is this something you guys plan to raise at any level, or have you kind of given up on enforcement?
No, we do intend to consult with our partners on the Security Council about how to address our concerns with this. We've long said